On a cold, fog-drenched night in the heart of World War II, a mission was launched that, by every known law of war, physics, intelligence, and probability, should have ended in absolute disaster. The planners themselves quietly expected failure. The pilots believed it was a one-way flight. The enemy, confident in their defenses, never imagined they were about to witness something that would fracture the logic of warfare itself. And yet, by dawn, the balance of the war had shifted. Not because of overwhelming firepower, not because of numbers, but because of a single mission that unfolded in a way historians still cannot fully explain. No intercepted radio messages, no surviving enemy reports that made sense, no clear reason why defenses failed when they should have succeeded. It was as if the war itself blinked, and when it opened its eyes again, the world was no longer the same. This is not a story about a famous general or a well-documented battle. This is the story of one mission, carried out by ordinary men, that produced extraordinary consequences, a mission that reshaped strategy, morale, and the future of modern warfare. And decades later, even with declassified documents and advanced analysis, historians still argue over one simple question: how did this actually happen? The impossible plan. By 1943, the war had reached a brutal stalemate. On maps across Allied command rooms, thick red lines marked enemy territory that seemed untouchable. Every bombing route was predicted, every naval movement tracked, every major offensive anticipated weeks in advance. Intelligence officers knew the enemy's radar coverage down to the kilometer. Anti-aircraft guns were layered in deadly concentric rings. Fighter patrols moved like clockwork. Any conventional attack would be detected, intercepted, and annihilated long before reaching its target. And yet, buried within a series of dull intelligence briefings, a pattern emerged. Something so subtle that most analysts dismissed it as coincidence. A gap, not in defenses but in assumptions. The enemy had designed their entire system around what made sense, around what was logical, around what no sane commander would ever attempt. That was when the proposal was born. The mission plan was simple on paper and suicidal in reality. A small force would strike a target so heavily, defended, that it had been labeled, psychologically, secure. The enemy believed it was impossible to reach under combat conditions. There would be no escort fighters for most of the route, no alternate landing fields. Fuel margins were calculated down to minutes. Weather forecasts predicted chaos, cloud walls, turbulence, and near-zero visibility. Even worse, the mission required flying into the enemy's strongest radar zone, not around it. Senior commanders argued for days. Some called it reckless. Others called it desperation disguised as innovation. One officer reportedly said, "If this works, it will change the war. If it fails, it will never officially exist." The crews were volunteers. Not because they were brave, though. They were, but because no one could be ordered to fly a mission like this. They were told only what they needed to know. Many wrote letters that night they never expected to be mailed. Engines roared to life in silence as ground crews avoided eye contact, knowing they were watching men step into history or vanish into it. As the aircraft lifted off, disappearing into darkness and cloud, no one at headquarters expected to see them again. Somewhere over enemy territory, everything that should have gone wrong didn't. Radar stations detected faint echoes, but operators dismissed them as weather interference. Fighter controllers hesitated, uncertain whether they were seeing ghosts on their screens. Anti-aircraft batteries stood ready, but received no clear targeting data. The sky itself seemed to cooperate. Breaking cloud, cover at precisely the wrong moment for defenders and the perfect moment for attackers. Inside the aircraft, crews reported strange phenomena years later. Instrument readings that lagged or spiked without explanation, radio silence that felt unnatural, and visual cues that contradicted navigation charts. One navigator later said it felt like the plane was slipping between moments, unseen not because of stealth, but because the enemy never quite realized it was there when the target finally emerged from the clouds. It was exactly where intelligence predicted, and completely unprepared. The strike was devastating. Precision weapons hit critical infrastructure nodes not meant to be vulnerable. Secondary explosions revealed hidden weaknesses no one knew existed. Enemy command systems went dark, not gradually, but all at once. Within minutes, communication across entire regions collapsed. Defenses fired blindly, too late and in the wrong directions. Fighters scrambled after the attackers had already turned for home. And then came the most inexplicable part. Every single aircraft escaped. No confirmed intercepts, no coordinated pursuit, no effective counterattack. The enemy, stunned and confused, could not even agree on what had happened. Some commanders believed it was a massive attack and waited for a second wave that never came. Others thought it was sabotage from within. By the time the truth began to form, the mission was already over. When the crews landed, ground personnel stared in disbelief. Aircraft that should have been shredded by flak were intact. Fuel gauges, read nearly empty. Men climbed out exhausted, shaken, and unsure how to explain what they had just survived. They didn't know it yet, but the war had just crossed. A line it could never uncross. The immediate damage was severe, but the psychological impact was catastrophic. Enemy commanders no longer trusted their own defenses. Radar networks were reorganized, slowing response times. Fighter patrols were spread thinner, weakening other fronts. Resources were diverted to protect targets once thought untouchable. Morale cracked not because of losses, but because of uncertainty. If that target could be hit, then nothing was truly safe. Allied strategy changed overnight. Tactics once considered impossible were now studied seriously. Smaller, riskier missions replaced massive, predictable operations. Planners realized that confusing the enemy was sometimes more powerful than destroying them. The idea that warfare followed fixed rules began to collapse. After the war, historians tried to reconstruct the mission in detail. Weather records didn't fully explain it. Enemy reports contradicted each other. Radar logs showed gaps that shouldn't exist. Survivors remembered events differently, as if reality itself had bent under pressure. Some believe it was a perfect storm of human error and environmental conditions. Others argue it was an early example of psychological warfare accidentally executed to perfection. A few suggest something even stranger, that in moments of extreme chaos, complex systems can fail in ways no model can predict. Whatever the truth, one fact remains undeniable. After that mission, the war was no longer the same. The enemy never regained the same confidence. And modern warfare, from stealth technology to asymmetric tactics, traces part of its philosophy back to that single night when the impossible happened, a mission that should have failed, a plan that made no sense, an outcome no one can fully explain, and a reminder that history is sometimes shaped not by certainty, but by the moments when certainty breaks the files that were locked away. When the war ended, the world expected answers. Victories demanded explanations, defeats demanded lessons. But this mission, this one impossible night, did not fit into any category. The post-war world understood how to process. Official reports were written, then quietly revised. Details were removed. Timelines were blurred. Names were replaced with codes. And then, without ceremony, the majority of the mission's documentation was sealed under classifications, so high that even senior historians were denied access for decades. When fragments finally emerged years later, they raised more questions than they answered. Flight paths didn't align with known navigation capabilities of the time. Radar blackout zones appeared where no jamming equipment was deployed. Enemy defenses reacted inconsistently, as if different units were fighting entirely different battles in the same airspace. Some after-action reports contradicted basic physics, claiming aircraft were detected after they had already left the area. Most disturbing of all were the crew testimonies. Individually, they sounded like stress-induced confusion, but together they formed a pattern. Multiple crew members, from different aircraft, described the same sensations. A strange calm in the cockpit, an unnatural silence on the radios, a feeling that time itself had slowed or stretched during critical moments. These were trained combat veterans, not rookies prone to panic. And yet, years later, many refused to speak publicly about that night, saying only that something helped us, or something failed the enemy. Military analysts tried to rationalize it. They blamed overconfidence, miscommunication, and environmental anomalies. But privately, even they admitted the truth was incomplete. Because if the official explanations were correct, then similar missions should have been repeatable. They never were. While Allied records were sealed, enemy archives, when uncovered, painted an even more unsettling picture. Commanders on duty that night disagreed violently in their reports. Some insisted the attack was massive, involving dozens of aircraft. Others swore it was only a handful. Radar operators claimed to see formations that vanished instantly. Anti-aircraft units reported firing continuously without confirmed hits, while nearby batteries claimed they were never ordered to engage at all. One enemy officer wrote in his diary that the attack felt unreal, as if they were reacting to shadows rather than machines. Another report suggested internal sabotage, accusing technicians of deliberately disabling systems, accusations that led to arrests and executions. It had infected the enemy's confidence. After the fact, trust within the defensive network collapsed almost overnight. But the most chilling document came from a regional command summary written weeks later. It stated plainly that their defensive doctrine had failed not because of weakness, but because it had been outthought. That the enemy had exploited not gaps in weapons, but gaps in belief. They attacked where no one believed an attack could exist. From that moment forward, the enemy fought differently, more cautiously, more defensively. And fear, once a weapon they wielded, became something they carried themselves. The mission had done more than destroy infrastructure at E, had infected the enemy's confidence. Why? History still can't let it go. Today, military academies still study this mission, but never agree on its conclusion. Some call it the greatest example of operational audacity in modern warfare. Others call it an accident elevated into legend by coincidence and survival bias. A few quietly admit that no existing model fully explains it. Because war, for all its brutality, is usually predictable in hindsight. This mission is not. Even with satellite simulations, AI-driven reconstructions, and complete access to available data, analysts cannot recreate the outcome reliably. Change one small variable, the weather, the timing, the human hesitation, and the mission collapses into catastrophe. And yet, on that night, everything aligned. Was it luck? Was it genius? Or was it the rare moment when a rigid system encountered chaos it could not absorb? Perhaps that is why this mission still matters. Not because of what it destroyed, but because of what it revealed. That wars are not won only by power, but by imagination. That certainty can be more dangerous than ignorance. And that sometimes, history turns not on grand strategies, but on a single night when the impossible is attempted and succeeds. And that is why, decades later, historians still argue. Because if this mission truly changed the war forever, then it also proved that the rules of war were never as solid as we believed. The men who came back different. The crews who flew that mission returned as heroes, but they never truly returned as the same men. In the weeks that followed, medical officers noted nothing unusual in their physical condition. No injuries, no clear signs of trauma beyond what any combat veteran carried, and yet something was undeniably altered. They slept lightly. They avoided reunions. They spoke less about combat than before, as if words themselves had become insufficient. When pressed in private interviews, some admitted they felt as though the mission had passed through them rather than the other way around. One pilot described the experience as being completely alert yet detached, as if someone else had taken control during the most dangerous moments. A gunner recalled that he never felt fear, not bravery, but absence of fear, something he said frightened him more afterward than enemy fire ever had. Years later, reunions of these men were quiet affairs. They did not trade war stories like others. Instead, they shared long silences. When asked why, one veteran answered simply, "Because we all remember the same things. And we don't know how." Their medals were real. Their victory was official. But whatever truly carried them through that night remained unnamed and unshared. The birth of modern warfare. Without public announcement or dramatic doctrine changes, militaries around the world quietly learned the lesson of that mission. Planners stopped asking only what the enemy could defend, and started asking what the enemy believed did not need defending. The idea of attacking expectations rather than positions reshaped strategy across air, sea, and land. Stealth technology, electronic deception, psychological operations, and asymmetric warfare all trace philosophical roots to that single night. Not because the technology existed yet, but because the mindset did. Victory no longer required overwhelming force. It required misdirection, timing, and the courage to act outside accepted logic. The enemy never publicly acknowledged this shift, but their actions revealed it. Defensive lines grew thicker but slower. Command approval chains became longer. Fear of the unexpected began to outweigh preparation for the expected. In a strange way, that mission marked the moment warfare became less about machines and more about minds. And once war entered the realm of perception and belief, it could never return to simpler rules. So what truly happened that night? Was it the flawless execution of an insane plan? Was it environmental coincidence elevated by human survival? Or was it proof that in moments of extreme pressure, complex systems, human and mechanical, can fail in ways no one anticipates? Historians argue because accepting any single answer feels incomplete. To call it luck is unsatisfying. To call it genius feels too neat. And to admit that war sometimes escapes. Explanation is deeply uncomfortable for those who seek order in chaos. Perhaps the truth lies in between, a moment where courage met opportunity, where overconfidence met imagination, where the fog of war became something more than a metaphor. One mission, one night, a permanent fracture in the logic of war. And that is why, even now, this story refuses to fade. Because it reminds us that history is not always written by certainty, but by those willing to step into the unknown. Decades have passed since that mission vanished into the fog of history, yet its echo has never truly faded. The world moved on. New wars replaced old ones. New weapons made the skies deadlier and the decisions colder. But buried beneath layers of technology and doctrine, the shadow of that single night still lingers, quiet, unresolved, and unsettling. Every few years, a new historian revisits the files, convinced that this time the puzzle will finally come together. They chart radar coverage again. They rerun weather models. They reconstruct flight paths with modern simulations. And every time, the conclusion remains the same. The mission should not have succeeded. According to probability, it should have ended in total loss. According to doctrine, it violated every principle of survivability. According to reason, it was a gamble that no rational commander should have allowed. And yet it worked. Not because war suddenly became merciful, but because on that night, certainty failed. The enemy trusted systems too much. The attackers trusted human instinct at the edge of fear. Between those two beliefs, something slipped through. Something invisible to radar, doctrine, and expectation. Perhaps that is the real legacy of the mission. It taught the world that the most dangerous weapon is not a bomb or a machine, but an idea the enemy refuses to believe. That wars are not always won by strength, but by daring to step where logic says do not go. And that sometimes history bends, not for kings or armies, but for a handful of ordinary men who flew into darkness, expecting nothing, and changed everything. The night ended. The war continued, but the rules were never the same again. And maybe that is why this mission still haunts us. Because it proves that even in the most carefully planned conflicts, there are moments when the impossible doesn't just happen. It wins. So now the question is, what do you think really happened that night? Was it pure luck, unmatched courage, or something history still refuses to explain? If this mysterious World War II story kept you watching till the end, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more cinematic documentaries about untold missions, impossible battles, and secrets history never solved. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your theory might be the closest to the truth.